The metal restraints bit deep into Marcus Kane's wrists as the Zephyrian transport ship shuddered through hyperspace. Around him, the alien crew moved with practiced efficiency, their scaled hands dancing over holographic controls that pulsed with soft blue light. None of them looked at him directly anymore. They had learned that lesson 3 days ago when Subcommander Vex had made the mistake of meeting his eyes during interrogation. Marcus tested the bonds again, feeling the familiar burn of the energy shackles against his skin. The Zephyrians had been thorough in their capture, stripping him of weapons, armor, and even his military identification tags. What they couldn't strip away was the reputation that followed him across 3 star systems, like a shadow made of whispered fears. The ship's captain, a tall Zephyrian with ceremonial scars across his neck ridges, finally approached the holding cell. His translator device crackled to life as he spoke, converting his native clicks and hisses into flat, mechanical words. Human prisoner designation 77 Alpha. You will be transferred to detention facility Korthak upon arrival. The hegemony has special plans for you. Marcus didn't respond immediately. He had learned that silence unnerved them more than threats. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, almost conversational. Captain Zexai, isn't it? 3rd Fleet, if I remember correctly. He lost the cruiser Venom's Edge at the Battle of Kepler Station. The captain's pupils dilated with surprise. How could this human know such specific military details? The Battle of Kepler Station had been classified. The loss of his previous command buried in official reports that few outside the upper echelons had access to. You know nothing of our affairs, human. I know you were the only captain to survive that engagement. I also know you were demoted afterward. Marcus tilted his head slightly, studying the alien's reaction. Tell me, Captain, what did your superiors say when you reported that a single human ship had destroyed an entire battle group? The temperature in the holding area seemed to drop several degrees. The other crew members had stopped their work, their attention drawn to the conversation despite themselves. Captain Zexai's claws extended slightly from his fingertips, an involuntary stress response that Marcus noted with professional interest. Impossible. No single vessel could achieve such destruction. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. You're right, of course. A single vessel couldn't do that. He paused, letting the implication sink in. But I could. The silence that followed was profound. In the background, the ship's life support systems hummed their mechanical lullaby, but no one seemed to be breathing. Marcus had planted the seed of doubt, and now he could watch it grow in their eyes. Subcommander Vex, still bearing the bruises from their previous encounter, stepped forward despite himself. Captain, this is merely human bravado. Their species is known for exaggeration and— Subcommander, Marcus interrupted gently. You really should have your jaw looked at. I think I might have cracked something when you tried to use that neural probe on me. Vex's hand moved instinctively to his jaw, where the swelling was still visible beneath his scaled skin. The reminder of his humiliation sent ripples of unease through the assembled crew. They had all heard the reports. A bound human prisoner had somehow managed to headbutt their interrogation specialist with such force that it had required medical attention. Captain Zexai's translator buzzed with increasing static as his stress levels rose. You are restrained, powerless. Your ship is destroyed, your crew dead or captured. What exactly do you think you can accomplish from that cell? Oh, I'm not planning to escape, Captain. Marcus leaned back against the cell wall, his posture relaxed despite the circumstances. I'm exactly where I need to be. The cryptic response sent another wave of unease through the crew. What did he mean? Was this part of some larger human strategy? The questions multiplied in their minds like a virus, spreading doubt and fear with each passing moment. Computer, the captain called out, his voice slightly strained. Display all available files on Prisoner 77 Alpha. The holographic display that materialized above the central console was disappointingly sparse. Physical description, species classification, capture location, and date. No name, no military record, no service history. It was as if the human had materialized from nothing. Strange? Vex observed, his professional curiosity overriding his injured pride. Usually, human military personnel have extensive digital footprints. Service records, personnel files, medical histories. This one appears to have none. Marcus watched their growing confusion with satisfaction. The erasure of his official existence had been thorough, necessary for the kind of work he did. What they would never find in any database was far more terrifying than what they might discover. Tell me something, Captain, Marcus said, his voice cutting through their speculation. In all your years of military service, have you ever heard humans speak of someone called the Reaper? The reaction was immediate and electric. Several crew members took involuntary steps backward, their survival instincts recognizing a predator, even when their minds couldn't fully process the threat. Captain HFY's claws extended fully now, scraping against the metal console as his hands clenched. Human psychological warfare, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Attempting to frighten us with ghost stories. Ghost stories. Marcus seemed to consider this. Yes, I suppose that's what I've become. A story told in the dark corners of military installations. A warning whispered between sentries during long night watches. His eyes found each crew member in turn, watching as recognition dawned in their faces. But ghosts can't be captured, can they? The ship's communications array suddenly chirped with an incoming priority transmission. Captain HFY accepted it gratefully, eager for any distraction from the humans' unsettling presence. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing the angular features of Admiral Korvash, Supreme Commander of the Third Fleet. Captain HFY, I trust your prisoner remains secured. Yes, Admiral. Though I must report some concerning behavior. The human seems to possess classified intelligence about fleet operations. The Admiral's expression shifted subtly. A micro-expression that Marcus caught despite the alien features. Fear. The Admiral was afraid. What intelligence? Details about the Battle of Kepler Station, sir. Information that should be known only to... Say nothing more over open channels, the Admiral interrupted sharply. Maintain maximum security protocols. Under no circumstances should that prisoner be allowed contact with... The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the bridge in silence. Marcus began to laugh. A low, genuinely amused sound that sent chills down alien spines. Oh, Admiral Korvash, he said to the empty air. Still trying to keep secrets, are we? Detention facility Korthak hung in space like a metallic tumor, its angular surfaces bristling with weapon emplacements and sensor arrays. The transport ship approached through a carefully orchestrated dance of identification codes and security clearances, each checkpoint more paranoid than the last. Marcus observed the proceedings through the small viewport in his cell, cataloging defensive positions and noting patrol patterns with the automatic precision of a lifetime soldier. The docking procedure took nearly an hour, far longer than standard protocol demanded. Marcus understood why. Word had spread ahead of their arrival, and now everyone wanted to see the human prisoner who had unnerved an entire crew with nothing but words and implications. As the ship settled into its berth with a series of mechanical clanks, he could see figures gathering beyond the docking bay windows, their alien faces pressed against the transparent aluminum. Warden Threx was waiting when the airlock cycled open. She was a formidable example of Zephyrian military evolution, standing nearly 3 meters tall with additional cybernetic enhancements that made her presence even more imposing. Her reputation preceded her into the room like a cold wind. Threx had overseen this facility for 12 standard years, during which time not a single prisoner had successfully escaped. Bring him, she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. The escort detail was impressive in its overkill. 12 guards in full combat armor, energy weapons charged and ready, plus 2 hover drones equipped with stun nets. They formed a protective box around Marcus as he was transferred from the ship to a specially modified transport platform. The restraints had been upgraded during the journey, replacing the standard energy shackles with something that looked more like medieval torture equipment, crossed with advanced alien technology. Marcus walked calmly in the center of this paranoid formation, his expression relaxed and almost curious. His apparent lack of concern seemed to disturb the guards more than any struggle or protest might have. Prisoners were supposed to be afraid of Korthak. They were supposed to understand the hopelessness of their situation. This human acted like he was taking a casual tour of the facility. The corridors of Korthak were designed to intimidate. The walls were lined with a special metal that induced claustrophobia in most species, while the lighting was calibrated to create an unsettling psychological effect. Sound dampeners ensured that the only noise was the mechanical rhythm of footsteps and the hum of security systems. It was a place designed to break minds before bodies. Tell me, Warden, Marcus said conversationally as they walked, how many species are currently held in your facility? Threx didn't immediately respond. Standard protocol was to ignore prisoner attempts at conversation, but something about the human's tone suggested this was more than idle curiosity. 17 different species, she finally answered. Curiosity overriding protocol. Representatives from across the known galaxy. And how many have heard of Earth? The question seemed innocent enough, but Threx found herself analyzing it for hidden meanings. Most are familiar with your planet's designation, yes, but not its history. Marcus nodded as if confirming something. Not its real history. They had reached the maximum security wing now, where the most dangerous prisoners were housed in isolation cells that could contain beings capable of bending space-time or manipulating matter at the molecular level. Marcus was assigned to Cell Block 7, Section 3, Subsection Alpha. Even the address was classified. The cell itself was a masterpiece of paranoid engineering. Force fields, kinetic barriers, psionic dampeners, and exotic matter containment systems layered upon each other like an onion of imprisonment. The walls could resist nuclear explosions. The air supply was filtered through 17 different security protocols, and the entire space existed in a localized temporal field that prevented faster-than-light communication or travel. Impressive. Marcus observed as the restraints were finally removed and he stepped into the cell. Though I notice you haven't accounted for quantum tunneling in your containment field harmonics. The comment sent a ripple of concern through the technical staff. How could a human prisoner identify such a specific engineering flaw? The quantum resonance frequencies were classified at the highest levels, known only to the facility's chief engineers and the hegemony's most trusted scientists. Warden Threx dismissed the guards with a gesture, but remained standing outside the cell herself. Something about this prisoner demanded her personal attention. In 12 years of running Korthek, she had developed an instinct for danger, and every one of those instincts was currently screaming warnings. "What are you?" she asked finally, abandoning all pretense of standard procedure. Marcus settled onto the single piece of furniture the cell provided, a metal bench that served as both chair and bed. His movements were economical, precise like a predator conserving energy. "I'm exactly what your people made me," he replied. "A response to a problem you didn't know you had created." Before Threx could ask for clarification, her communication device chimed with an urgent priority message. She accepted it immediately, her attention splitting between the holographic display and the human prisoner who seemed suddenly far too calm. The message was from Admiral Korvash, and its contents made her blood freeze in her veins. "Warden Threx, new intelligence has come to light regarding your recent prisoner acquisition. Under no circumstances should you attempt interrogation. Do not allow him contact with other prisoners. Do not mention his presence to anyone outside essential personnel. Most importantly, do not, under any circumstances, allow him access to the facility's main computer. Systems." The transmission continued with a list of security protocols so extensive they would have been laughable if they hadn't been issued by the highest levels of military command. It was as if they were trying to contain a natural disaster rather than a single human being. Marcus had been watching her face during the entire message, reading her reactions with the skill of someone trained in psychological warfare. When the transmission ended, he smiled with genuine warmth. The Admiral always was thorough. "Tell me, Warden, did he mention the Kepler incident in his briefing?" Threx's hand moved instinctively to her sidearm. "How do you know about the 17 hegemony vessels that vanished in a single night? About the distress signals that cut off mid-transmission? About the rescue teams that found nothing but empty hulks drifting in space?" Marcus leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Or did he tell you about the message they found burned into the hull of the flagship?" The temperature in the corridor seemed to drop perceptibly. Threx found herself taking an involuntary step backward, despite the multiple layers of security between her and the prisoner. "What message?" she heard herself ask, though every instinct told her she didn't want to know the answer. Marcus stood slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. When he spoke, his voice carried across the space with perfect clarity. "The Reaper comes for all who harvest what is not theirs." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Threx felt something she hadn't experienced in years of dealing with the galaxy's most dangerous criminals. Pure primal fear. Not fear of death or injury, but something deeper. The fear that comes when a predator realizes it has become prey. Her communication device was buzzing again, but she couldn't seem to make herself answer it. Behind her, she could hear the facility's automated systems beginning to cycle through enhanced security protocols, as if the station itself sensed the presence of something it couldn't categorize or contain. In his cell, Marcus returned to his seat and closed his eyes. He appeared to be resting, but Threx could see the slight curve of his lips. He was smiling, not with malice or madness, but with the satisfaction of someone whose carefully laid plans were proceeding exactly as intended. "Computer," Threx finally managed to say, her voice slightly hoarse. "Increase security monitoring on cell block 7 by 200%. Institute lockdown protocols for all non-essential personnel." As the facility around them hummed with increased activity, Marcus opened his eyes and looked directly at her through the multiple layers of security barriers. "Warden," he said softly, "you should probably take that call." The mess hall of detention facility Korthak buzzed with nervous energy, as news of the new arrival spread through the prisoner population like wildfire. In a place where information was the most valuable currency, the presence of a human who could unnerve the guards simply by speaking had become the topic of every whispered conversation. Zalkris, a veteran Thaxarian arms dealer serving a life sentence for weapons trafficking, leaned across his table toward a small group of fellow inmates. His forearms gestured animatedly as he spoke in hushed tones, his compound eyes glittering with excitement. "I heard it from Gornex, who got it straight from a maintenance worker," he whispered. "The human hasn't even been interrogated yet. But half the security staff are requesting transfers. Sektar, a massive Bruthan warrior whose species was known for their fearlessness in combat, shifted uncomfortably in his specially reinforced chair. What could one human say that would frighten trained soldiers? They are a young species barely out of their home system. That's what everyone thought, interrupted Elisa, her melodic Etherian voice carrying an edge of worry. But I've been monitoring the guard communications through my telepathic abilities. Their minds are filled with terror and they don't even understand why. The conversation died as a new voice joined them, soft and measured but carrying an authority that demanded attention. Dr. Vexka, the facility's former chief medical officer before his conviction for illegal genetic experiments, rarely spoke to other prisoners. His presence at their table was unprecedented. "You are discussing the human in maximum security," he stated rather than asked. "I have been analyzing the behavioral patterns of the staff since his arrival. The psychological impact is far beyond what should be possible from a single individual." Zalkris leaned forward eagerly. "What have you discovered, Doctor?" "Fear responses triggered by specific terminology rather than physical threat. Guard rotations mysteriously developing equipment malfunctions whenever they're assigned to that sector. Most tellingly, security camera feeds in that area have been experiencing unexplained technical difficulties." Sektar's laugh boomed across the mess hall, drawing annoyed looks from other tables. "You suggest this human can manipulate technology through supernatural means?" "Ridiculous, no," Dr. Vexka replied calmly. "I suggest that the, administration is deliberately limiting information flow because they're afraid of what might happen if certain details become known." The implications of this statement settled over the group like a cold shadow. In 12 years of operation, Korthak had held beings capable of reshaping matter with their thoughts, creatures that could phase through solid walls, and entities that existed partially outside normal space-time. Nothing had ever made the administration afraid to share information. "There are stories," Elisa said suddenly, her ethereal features taking on a distant expression. "Old stories from the Outer Rim territories. Whispers of a human who appears during conflicts between the hegemony and smaller civilizations." "What kind of stories?" Zalkris asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to know. "Ships that vanish without distress calls, military installations that go dark overnight, entire fleets that simply stop responding to communications." Elisa's voice grew quieter with each word. "Always when the hegemony is engaged in what they call pacification operations against civilian populations." Dr. Vexka's analytical mind seized on the pattern immediately. "You're describing a single individual conducting asymmetric warfare against the galaxy's largest military force. The logistical requirements alone would be impossible. Unless," Sektar said slowly, his warrior's instincts recognizing something his logical mind rejected. "He isn't operating alone." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Threx herself. flanked by 4 guards and looking haggard in a way none of them had ever seen before. The warden's normally perfect posture was slightly slumped, and her eyes held the glazed quality of someone operating on too little sleep and too much stimulant. "All prisoners return to your cells immediately," she announced, her voice carrying none of its usual authority. "Facility-wide lockdown is now in effect until further notice." As the prisoners filed out of the mess hall under heavy guard, Dr. Vexka managed to position himself near enough to Threx to observe her more closely. What he saw confirmed his worst suspicions. The warden wasn't just tired. She was terrified. More than that, she was exhibiting the classic symptoms of someone whose worldview had been fundamentally shattered. Back in their cells, the rumors continued to spread through more covert channels. Prisoners tapped coded messages through the walls, used reflected light signals through the few available mirrors, and passed information through the complex network of favors and obligations that existed in any long-term detention facility. By evening shift change, a consensus had emerged among the inmate population. The human in maximum security wasn't just another prisoner. He was something that the hegemony's vast intelligence apparatus couldn't classify, couldn't understand, and therefore couldn't control. In his isolated cell, Marcus was well aware of the effect his presence was having on the facility. The sound dampeners were excellent at preventing communication, but they couldn't stop the subtle vibrations that traveled through the station's superstructure. He could feel the increased tension in the way footsteps echoed through the corridors, sensed the paranoia in the irregular patterns of the guard rotations. His evening meal arrived via automated delivery system rather than through the usual guard escort, another sign that the administration was trying to minimize human contact. The meal itself was standard prisoner rations, nutritionally adequate but designed to be as psychologically unrewarding as possible. Marcus ate methodically while reviewing his progress. Phase 1 was proceeding perfectly. The seeds of doubt had been planted and were already taking root throughout the facility's hierarchy. Fear was spreading like a virus, creating the exact conditions he needed for Phase 2. As he finished eating, his enhanced hearing picked up the sound of hushed voices in the corridor beyond his cell. The conversation was too muffled to make out individual words, but the tone was unmistakable. The guards were arguing about something, their stress levels elevated beyond normal parameters. Marcus smiled to himself as he settled onto his bench for the night. Tomorrow would bring the first test of whether his reputation had preceded him far enough to accomplish what he needed. The facility's communication logs would show increased traffic to and from Hegemony High Command. As administrators desperately sought guidance on how to handle a prisoner they were beginning to suspect might be beyond their ability to contain, what they didn't yet understand was that Marcus had never intended to escape through physical means. His breakout would be far more devastating than simply walking through walls or overpowering guards. He was going to escape by making them so afraid of keeping him that they would voluntarily open the doors. In the depths of space around Korthak, automated sensor buoys detected the distant approach of several unidentified vessels. The signatures were too faint to classify, their approach vectors seemingly random. Standard protocol would normally dismiss such contacts as space debris or natural phenomena. But in the current atmosphere of heightened paranoia, even sensor ghosts were enough to trigger additional alert levels. The facility's defense systems cycled to higher readiness states, while communication arrays began broadcasting coded warnings to hegemony patrol fleets. Marcus felt the subtle change in the station's operational rhythm, and knew that his allies had arrived right on schedule. The endgame was about to begin, and soon the galaxy would remember why humans had earned their reputation as the universe's most dangerous problem solvers. The Reaper was coming home, and he was bringing friends. The emergency briefing room of detention facility Korthak had never seen such a gathering of high-ranking officials. Admiral Korvash himself had arrived via emergency transport, accompanied by fleet intelligence, Director Mexivai, and a team of specialists whose credentials were so classified that even Warden Threx didn't have clearance to view them. The holographic displays around the room showed tactical readouts, prisoner psychological profiles, and most disturbing of all, a growing list of anomalous incidents that had begun occurring throughout the facility since Marcus's arrival. Equipment failures, communication glitches, and unexplained behavioral changes among both staff and prisoners had created an atmosphere of barely controlled chaos. "Report," Admiral Korvash commanded. his usual composure cracked by stress and sleepless nights. Threx activated the central display, showing a timeline of events since the prisoner's arrival. 72 hours ago, we received what we believed to be a standard prisoner transfer. Since then, we have experienced a cascade failure in facility morale and operational efficiency. Cascade failure? Director HFY's multiple eyes focused intently on the data streams. Explain. Guard rotation requests have increased by 400%. Productivity in all sectors has dropped by 30%. We've had 6 requests for early retirement and 3 applications for immediate transfer to other facilities. Threx paused, clearly struggling with what she had to report next. Yesterday, 2 guards assigned to the maximum security sector simply didn't report for duty. When we found them, they were in their quarters, claiming they couldn't remember why they were afraid to go to work. The silence that followed was profound. Military personnel didn't simply abandon their posts due to vague fears. The Zephyrian psyche was engineered for discipline and duty, making such behavior unprecedented in modern military history. "Has the prisoner been interrogated?" asked one of the unnamed specialists, her voice carrying the flat tones of someone accustomed to extracting information through unpleasant means. "All interrogation attempts have been counterproductive," Threx admitted. "Standard psychological pressure techniques have no effect. Enhanced interrogation protocols somehow result in our personnel becoming more distressed than the subject. We've had 3 interrogation specialists request medical leave after sessions with him." Admiral Korvash leaned forward, his claws extended slightly in a stress response he couldn't quite control. "Show me the interrogation recordings." The holographic display shifted to show the sterile interior of an interrogation chamber. Marcus sat calmly in a chair designed to cause discomfort to most humanoid species. His hands folded casually in his lap. Across from him, interrogation specialist Kextar prepared his instruments with the practiced efficiency of someone who had broken thousands of minds over his career. "State your name and military designation," Kextar began, his voice carrying the hypnotic undertones that made his species so effective at psychological manipulation. "I think you know who I am," Marcus replied, his tone conversational and relaxed. "The question is whether you're brave enough to say it out loud." Kextar's confidence faltered slightly, but he pressed on. "You will answer the question, or face the consequences of your defiance." Marcus tilted his head, studying the interrogator with curious interest. "Tell me, Specialist, how many worlds has the hegemony liberated in the past 5 years?" "I am asking the questions here, human." "Are you? Because it seems to me that you're avoiding them." Marcus leaned forward slightly, his movement so casual that it took a moment for the watchers to realize he had somehow shifted from a position of apparent submission to one of subtle dominance. 47 worlds, Specialist. 47 civilizations that requested hegemony protection and received conquest instead. Kextar activated one of his devices, sending a pulse of neural energy designed to cause intense discomfort. Marcus didn't even flinch. "Interesting technique," he observed. "I've seen something similar used by the Krillian Empire. Of course, they stopped using it after what happened to the 7th Pacification Fleet." The interrogator's hands began to tremble slightly. "What happened to the 7th Fleet?" "You don't know?" Marcus seemed genuinely surprised. "I would have thought hegemony intelligence kept better records. They encountered someone who took exception to their methods. Someone who decided that predators needed to learn what it felt like to be prey." The recording showed Kextar backing away from the table, his instruments forgotten, as some primal instinct warned him of danger. In the present briefing room, Admiral Korvash paused the playback. "How is he doing this?" he demanded. "What kind of training could produce such psychological dominance?" Director HFY was studying biometric readouts from the interrogation. His stress indicators remained completely normal throughout the session. Heart rate, brain activity, hormone levels, all within baseline parameters. He's exhibiting no signs of deception, fear, or aggression. Then how is he affecting our personnel so dramatically? One of the unnamed specialists stepped forward, her features hidden behind a privacy screen that distorted her appearance. "Admiral, we need to consider the possibility that this individual's reputation is doing more damage than his actual capabilities." Explain. Psychological warfare operates on the principle that perception becomes reality. If enough people believe someone is dangerous, they become dangerous regardless of their actual abilities. The fear itself becomes a weapon, Threx activated another display showing facility-wide surveillance data. The effect is spreading beyond direct contact with the prisoner. Personnel who have never seen him are requesting transfers. The prisoner population is becoming increasingly agitated, not because of anything specific he's done, but because of what they think he might do. Then we isolate him completely, Admiral Korvash decided. No contact with staff or prisoners. Automated systems only. Sir, Threx said hesitantly, we tried that. The prisoner somehow knew about the isolation protocols before they were implemented. He thanked the guards for their consideration in advance. The room fell silent again as the implications sank in. Either the human had sources of information that should have been impossible to access, or he was manipulating events with a level of foresight that bordered on precognition. There's something else, Director HFY added, activating a new display showing sensor data from around the facility. We've been detecting anomalous readings in local space. Nothing that would normally warrant attention, but given the circumstances, the display showed a pattern of apparently random energy signatures scattered throughout the system. To most observers, they would appear to be natural phenomena or sensor artifacts, but when viewed as a whole, they formed a rough sphere around Korthak's position. How many contacts? Admiral Korvash asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer wouldn't be reassuring. 17 distinct signatures, sir. All maintaining precise distance from the facility despite no apparent propulsion or navigation systems. Marcus had been right, Admiral Korvash realized with growing dread. The human wasn't a prisoner at all. He was bait in a trap that was slowly closing around them. The question was no longer how to contain him, but whether it was already too late to prevent whatever he had planned. In his cell, Marcus continued his meditation, seemingly unaware of the panic spreading through the facility's command structure, but the slight smile on his lips suggested he knew exactly how the pieces were falling into place. The Reaper had planted his seeds of doubt, and now it was time to watch them grow into something far more dangerous than any physical weapon. Fear was spreading through the hegemony's military apparatus like a virus, and soon they would be forced to make a choice that would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. The secured conference chamber deep within Hegemony High Command buzzed with activity as the most classified intelligence files in the galaxy were brought before the Emergency Council. Supreme Chancellor Vorthak, leader of the Hegemony for over 2 decades, studied the assembled data with growing unease. Around the curved table, representatives from 7 different species waited in tense silence. Director HFY, the Chancellor spoke, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Present your findings on the human prisoner. The Intelligence Director activated the chamber's central holographic display, showing a complex web of interconnected data points spanning 3 star systems and covering nearly a decade of military operations. Honored Council, what we initially dismissed as psychological warfare appears to be something far more sophisticated. Our prisoner hasn't just been manipulating individual personnel, he's been conducting a systematic intelligence operation against the entire Hegemony military structure. The display shifted to show a timeline of seemingly unrelated incidents across Hegemony space, fleet movements that had been compromised, supply convoys that had mysteriously disappeared, and most disturbing of all, a pattern of military failures that had been attributed to various causes but shared one common factor. Every major setback our forces have experienced in the past 5 years occurred in systems where human civilians had recently been relocated or where human merchant vessels had been granted passage through Hegemony space. HFY continued. We believed we were managing a primitive species that posed no significant threat. Chancellor Vorthak's primary eyes focused intently on the data, while his secondary eyes continued to monitor the reactions of the other council members. Are you suggesting that the humans have been conducting covert operations against us? I'm suggesting something far worse, Chancellor. I believe we have been systematically infiltrated and studied by an intelligence organization that operates on a level we didn't know was possible. The holographic display changed again, now showing detailed psychological profiles of Hegemony military personnel who had come into contact with human civilians or prisoners over the past several years. The pattern was subtle but unmistakable, gradually increasing stress levels, decreased operational efficiency, and a growing tendency to avoid missions that might involve contact with human populations. Council member Zerthak, representing the militant Bruthan faction, slammed his massive fist on the table. You speak of shadows and conspiracies. One human prisoner has created chaos in a single facility. This proves their weakness, not their strength. Does it? HFY asked calmly. Or does it prove that they understand us better than we understand ourselves? Before Zerthak could respond, an aide entered the chamber carrying a data crystal marked with the highest security classifications. The Chancellor accepted it personally, his expression growing increasingly grave as he reviewed its contents. What is it, Chancellor? Asked Council Member Elith, her ethereal features betraying concern. A complete intelligence profile on our prisoner, compiled by our deep cover assets in human space. Chancellor Vorthak's voice had taken on a quality none of them had heard before, uncertainty. His name is Marcus Kane, former Special Operations Commander in the human military. Official records show him as killed in action 3 years ago during the Rigel 7 incident. The silence that followed was absolute. Dead men didn't walk into hegemony detention facilities and proceed to dismantle military morale with conversation. There's more, the Chancellor continued, his voice growing steadily more strained. According to human intelligence sources, Marcus Kane was the architect of Operation Silent Thunder, a psychological warfare program designed specifically to counter technologically superior opponents. Director HFY felt a chill run down his spine as pieces of a horrifying puzzle began to fall into place. Chancellor, if this individual faked his own death and allowed himself to be captured, then this entire situation has been orchestrated from the beginning, Chancellor Vorthak finished. We haven't captured a prisoner. We've walked into a trap. The holographic display updated to show the current tactical situation around detention facility Korthak. What had appeared to be random sensor contacts were now revealed to be precisely positioned in a three-dimensional grid that could cut off all escape routes from the facility. Council Member Kexhai, the eldest member of the Assembly, spoke for the first time since the briefing had begun. In my 4 centuries of military service, I have never encountered an enemy who would voluntarily place themselves in our custody as part of a strategic operation. What could he possibly hope to accomplish? The answer came from an unexpected source. The chamber's communication array activated automatically, displaying an incoming transmission with priority codes that shouldn't have existed. The holographic figure that materialized was unmistakably human, but the sophisticated encryption and routing, protocols required to breach hegemony high commands, security were beyond anything their intelligence assessments had suggested humans could achieve. Honored. Council, the figure spoke in perfect hegemony standard. My name is Admiral Sarah Chen, and I believe you have something that belongs to us. The reaction around the table was immediate and electric. Human vessels weren't supposed to be capable of reaching the hegemony capital system, much less accessing their most secure communication networks. How is this possible? Zerthak demanded, his warrior instincts fully engaged despite the impossibility of the situation. The same way 17 of our ships are currently surrounding your detention facility without your sensors detecting them, Admiral Chen replied calmly. The same way we've been monitoring your military communications for the past 5 years. The same way Marcus Kane walked into your custody exactly when and where we needed him to. Chancellor Vorthak found his voice, though it took considerable effort. What do you want? We want you to stop, Chen said simply. Stop the forced relocations. Stop the pacification campaigns against civilian populations. Stop treating the galaxy like your personal hunting ground. And if we refuse? Admiral Chen's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes suggested that the question had been anticipated. Then you'll discover why every species that has encountered humanity in warfare has developed the same advice. Don't. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. Director HFY was the first to speak, his analytical mind racing through the implications. They've been playing a game we didn't even know existed. Every human we've encountered, every civilian population we've relocated, every primitive merchant ship we've allowed passage, they've been gathering intelligence and positioning assets. How many? Chancellor Vorthak asked, though he suspected the answer would be worse than his fears. Based on the data patterns, I estimate we've had human operatives observing our operations in over 60% of our active systems. They've been studying us, learning our weaknesses, preparing for this moment. Council Member Elith, whose species specialized in long-term strategic thinking, finally grasped the full scope of what they were facing. This isn't a military confrontation. This is a demonstration. They're showing us that they can reach us anywhere, anytime, and we'll never see them coming. The chamber's alert system suddenly activated, flooding the room with warning lights and automated announcements. Emergency broadcasts from across hegemony space began streaming in, each one more impossible than the last. Fleet Command reports 17 unidentified vessels have appeared simultaneously in 8 different systems, an aide reported, his voice cracking with stress. No sensor contacts, no energy signatures, they simply materialized. Strategic Command reports complete communications blackout with the 3rd, 7th, and 9th fleets. Another aide added. No distress signals, no indication of hostile action. They've simply stopped responding. Chancellor Vorthak realized with growing horror that they were witnessing the execution of a plan that had been years in the making. The humans hadn't just infiltrated their military structure, they had turned it into a weapon against itself. Get me a direct line to detention facility Korthak, he ordered. Immediately. When the connection was established, Warden Threx appeared on the display looking haggard and desperate. Behind her, the facility's corridors were filled with confused personnel trying to manage systems that seemed to be developing minds of their own. Warden, what is the status of the human prisoner?
Chancellor,
I'm not entirely certain he's actually a prisoner anymore, Threx replied, her professional composure finally cracking completely. He's been requesting specific items, writing materials, access to historical databases, communication with other inmates. Every time we refuse, another system malfunctions. Are you saying he's somehow controlling your facility's technology? I'm saying that coincidences stopped happening when he arrived. Either he's the luckiest individual in the galaxy, or he's been orchestrating events with a precision that should be impossible for someone in maximum security confinement. In his cell, Marcus Kane finished writing his message and held it up to the security camera. The words were written in perfect hegemony standard, despite the fact that he had never been provided with writing materials. The negotiation chamber aboard the hegemony flagship Eternal Dominion had been hastily converted from a standard briefing room into a meeting space, suitable for the most important diplomatic contact in galactic history. Chancellor Vorthak sat across from a holographic projection of Admiral Sarah Chen, while behind him stood the full emergency council, their faces reflecting varying degrees of disbelief and poorly concealed fear. The journey to this moment had been surreal. Human vessels had simply appeared throughout hegemony space without warning, their technology somehow rendering the galaxy's most advanced sensor networks useless. No shots had been fired, no hostile moves made, but the message was unmistakably clear. The humans could strike anywhere, anytime, and the hegemony would never see them coming. Admiral Chen, Chancellor Vorthak began, his voice carefully controlled despite the circumstances. Your demonstration has been most illuminating. Perhaps you could explain exactly what you hope to accomplish with this display. Chen's holographic image smiled with what appeared to be genuine warmth, though her eyes remained coldly analytical. Chancellor, what we hope to accomplish is very simple. We want to prevent a war that would devastate half the galaxy. Prevent a war? Council member Zerthek interrupted, his massive frame bristling with indignation. You infiltrate our space, manipulate our personnel, and threaten our facilities, then speak of preventing war? Member Zerthak, isn't it? Chen's attention shifted to the Bruthan representative. Your species values directness, so let me be clear. The hegemony has been conducting what you call pacification operations against civilian populations for 5 years. By our calculations, you've forcibly relocated over 2 billion sentient beings and strip-mined their homeworlds. Those were necessary actions to maintain galactic stability, Chancellor Vorthak replied. The civilizations in question lacked the technological sophistication to properly utilize their resources. And there it is, Chen said quietly. The fundamental difference between our species. You see resources to be exploited. We see people to be protected. Director Mexvi leaned forward, his multiple eyes focusing intently on the hologram. Admiral, your capabilities clearly exceed our intelligence estimates. But surely you understand that the hegemony cannot simply abandon its expansion policies based on threats, no matter how sophisticated. Chen nodded, as if she had expected exactly this response. Director, you're absolutely right. Threats alone won't change your fundamental approach to galactic governance. That's why we've prepared something more persuasive. The holographic display in the center of the chamber activated, showing tactical readouts from across hegemony space. What they revealed sent a collective chill through the assembled leadership. Ladies, gentlemen, and esteemed beings, Chen continued conversationally, you are currently looking at the real-time status of every major military installation, supply depot and command center in hegemony space. What you'll notice is that each facility is currently experiencing what your reports will undoubtedly classify as equipment malfunctions. The data streams were overwhelming. Communication arrays offline across 17 systems. Defense platforms reporting targeting system failures in 12 sectors. Supply convoys discovering that their cargo manifest had been mysteriously altered to include medical supplies and food, packages instead of weapons and mining equipment. This is impossible, whispered Council Member Kexhai. Our systems are completely isolated from external networks. Your systems were isolated, Chen corrected gently. But isolation doesn't help when the threat comes from within. Every piece of equipment you've purchased, every component you've manufactured, every software update you've installed over the past 5 years has included contributions from human sources. The implications hit the Council like a physical blow. The hegemony's rapid technological advancement in recent years, their improved manufacturing efficiency, their enhanced communication networks, all of it had been achieved through trade agreements and technology transfers with species that had secretly been working with humanity. Chancellor, Vorthak felt the foundation of his worldview cracking beneath him. You're saying that our entire technological infrastructure has been compromised? Not compromised, Chancellor, enhanced. Chen's tone remained maddeningly reasonable. Every system is working exactly as designed. It's just that the design specifications included certain features that weren't mentioned in the technical documentation. The chamber's emergency alert system activated again, this time displaying a priority message from Fleet Command. Admiral Korvash's image appeared on the secondary display, his usually composed demeanor showing cracks of barely controlled panic. Chancellor, we have a situation. Every ship in the Third Fleet is reporting the same phenomenon. Their weapon systems are operational, their engines function normally, but their targeting computers refuse to lock onto any vessel broadcasting human identification codes. Override the systems manually, Zerthak demanded. We tried, sir. The override commands are accepted, but the targeting systems interpret any order to fire on human vessels as a malfunction and shut down for safety diagnostics. Chen watched this exchange with what appeared to be amused interest. Admiral Korvash, isn't it? I believe you've met my colleague Marcus Kane. How is he adjusting to his accommodations? The transition from tactical discussion to casual inquiry about a prisoner was so jarring that several council members actually flinched. The human ability to maintain conversational tone while demonstrating overwhelming technological superiority was proving more psychologically devastating than any direct threat. Admiral, Chancellor Vorthak said, his voice carefully controlled. What exactly are your terms? Quite reasonable, actually. The hegemony will cease all forced relocation programs immediately. Current displaced populations will be offered the choice of returning to their homeworlds or accepting resettlement assistance to establish new colonies. Military operations against civilian targets will end. And in exchange, humanity will continue to honor all existing trade agreements, maintain diplomatic relations, and provide technological assistance for peaceful development projects. We're not interested in conquest, Chancellor. We're interested in coexistence. Council member Eilith, whose species specialized in detecting deception, studied Chen's holographic image intently. Admiral, your terms seem almost as generous. What assurance do we have that humanity won't use its technological advantages to dominate galactic affairs? Chen's expression grew serious for the first time since the negotiations had begun. Member Yelith, I'm going to share something with you that our government hoped would never become necessary. The technology demonstrations you've witnessed today represent perhaps 1% of our actual capabilities. She paused to let that statement settle before continuing. Humanity learned warfare from species that could destroy planets with a thought. We developed strategy fighting enemies that could manipulate space and time. We perfected psychological operations against beings that could read minds across star systems. What you call our most advanced technologies we consider basic defensive systems. The silence that followed was profound. Every species in the galaxy had assumed that humanity was simply another young civilization with modest potential. The revelation that they had been systematically underestimating human capabilities for decades was reshaping their understanding of galactic politics in real time. But here's what makes humanity different. Chen continued, her voice taking on a tone of quiet intensity. We could have announced our presence by destroying your fleets. We could have demonstrated our superiority by crippling your infrastructure. Instead, we sent one man to show you that your prisons couldn't hold us. Your interrogations couldn't break us, and your military couldn't intimidate us. Chancellor Vorthak finally understood the true nature of the trap they had walked into. Marcus Kane was never a prisoner at all. Oh, he was definitely a prisoner, Chancellor. But he was our prisoner, sent to deliver a message that could only be communicated by someone who chose to be vulnerable in order to demonstrate strength. In the depths of detention facility Korthak, Marcus Kane stood calmly as the energy barriers of his cell deactivated. Warden Threx and a full squad of guards waited outside, but none of them moved to stop him as he walked through the opening. The psychological warfare was complete. They were no longer capable of seeing him as a captive. "Thank you for your hospitality, Warden," Marcus said politely as he passed. "I trust the negotiations are proceeding smoothly?" Threx could only nod, her mind still struggling to process how a human prisoner had somehow transformed into the most dangerous individual in the galaxy without ever raising his voice or making a threat. Marcus smiled and walked calmly toward the docking bay, where a human transport was waiting to take him home. Behind him, the most secure prison in the galaxy continued to function normally, its inmates and guards slowly coming to terms with the fact that they had just witnessed the end of one era and the beginning of another. The Reaper's work was done. The galaxy would never be the same. 6 months after the negotiations that reshaped galactic politics, the former hegemony colony world of Karis Prime buzzed with activity unlike anything its inhabitants had ever experienced. What had once been a strip mining operation designed to extract rare minerals from the planet's crust had been transformed into a joint reconstruction project that served as a symbol of the new galactic order. Marcus Kane stood on an observation platform, overlooking the main construction site, watching as human engineering teams worked alongside former hegemony military personnel to build what would become the galaxy's first interspecies cooperation center. The irony wasn't lost on him. Many of the aliens working below had once been part of the military machine that had displaced the planet's original inhabitants. The psychological profiles were accurate, observed Dr. Sarah Vexka, the former hegemony medical officer who had volunteered to join the reconstruction effort. Redemption through meaningful work proves to be a powerful motivator across multiple species. Marcus nodded, though his attention remained focused on a particular work crew below. Former Admiral Korvash was directing the installation of a memorial wall dedicated to the civilians who had been displaced during the original colonization. The Zephyrians' dedication to the project had surprised many observers, but Marcus had expected exactly this response. "Guilt is a universal emotion," he replied. "The difference is whether you channel it into defensive anger or constructive action." The transformation hadn't been immediate or universal. Significant portions of the former hegemony military had initially refused to accept the new political reality, leading to several months of internal conflict as loyalist factions attempted to maintain the old order. But humanity's technological demonstration had been too overwhelming to ignore, and gradually even the most militant voices had been forced to acknowledge that resistance was futile. "Commander Kane," a familiar voice called from behind them. Marcus turned to see Warden Threx approaching, though she now wore the simple gray uniform of the Galactic Rehabilitation Commission rather than her former military dress. "The morning briefing is ready for your review." The briefing covered the status of 17 different worlds where similar reconstruction projects were underway. Former hegemony military bases were being converted into humanitarian aid centers. Strip mining operations were being replaced with sustainable development programs. Most importantly, the displaced populations were being offered genuine choices about their futures rather than having decisions imposed upon them. "Resistance incidents?" Marcus asked, reviewing the data streams. "Down another 12% this week," Threx reported. The psychological adjustment programs are proving effective, though we're still seeing isolated cases of what Dr. Chen's team calls authority displacement syndrome among former command personnel. Marcus wasn't surprised. Military hierarchies that had operated on the principle of absolute obedience for centuries couldn't be reorganized overnight. But the alternative to gradual reformation was the complete collapse of galactic civilization, and even the most stubborn former hegemony officials understood that. How are the integration programs proceeding? Better than anticipated, Dr. Vexka interjected, activating a holographic display showing psychological assessment data. Mixed species work crews are reporting 73% satisfaction rates, and cross-cultural understanding metrics have improved dramatically. The integration programs had been Marcus's idea, based on his understanding of how former enemies could become allies through shared purpose. Instead of simply punishing former hegemony personnel, the new galactic government offered them opportunities to participate in repairing the damage their previous policies had caused. "Commander," Threx said hesitantly, "may I ask a personal question?" Marcus gestured for her to continue, though he suspected he knew what she was going to ask. "During your time at Korthak, you demonstrated capabilities that our intelligence services still can't fully explain. Yet now you work alongside former prisoners and guards as if that period never happened. How do you reconcile such extremes?" The question hung in the air as Marcus considered his response. Around them, the sounds of construction continued. Species that had been enemies 6 months ago now working together to build something better than either could have achieved alone. "Warden, what did you think my goal was when I allowed myself to be captured? Initially, we assumed escape or intelligence gathering. Later, we theorized that you intended to demonstrate human capabilities as a deterrent." "All true," Marcus acknowledged. "But there was a deeper purpose. I needed to understand whether redemption was possible." "Redemption?" "For all of us," Marcus clarified. "Humanity could have responded to hegemony aggression with overwhelming force. We could have dismantled your civilization and imposed our own order on the galaxy. But destruction is easy. Building something better requires understanding whether former enemies can become partners." Dr. Vexka's analytical mind grasped the implications immediately. "You were testing whether the psychological conditioning that enabled hegemony expansion could be redirected toward constructive purposes." "The experiment appears to be successful," Marcus confirmed, gesturing toward the work crews below. "Species that were taught to see others as resources to be exploited are learning to see them as partners in mutual development." A communication alert interrupted their conversation. The holographic display activated to show Admiral Sarah Chen calling from Earth, her expression carrying the satisfaction of someone whose long-term planning had achieved its objectives. "Marcus, I hope you're pleased with the progress reports. The Galactic Council has approved funding for the next phase of reconstruction projects." The Galactic Council being the new governing body that includes human representation, Marcus asked with amusement, among others. "Turns out that when you demonstrate you could destroy everyone but choose not to, they become remarkably willing to include you in decision-making processes." The transformation of galactic governance had been perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the entire operation. Rather than establishing human dominance, the negotiations had resulted in a truly representative system where decisions were made through consensus rather than force. It was a radical departure from thousands of years of galactic politics. "Any word from the Outer Rim territories?" Marcus inquired. "Species that were too distant to be directly affected by hegemony expansion are requesting membership in the new governmental structure. Apparently news of our diplomatic methods has spread throughout the galaxy." Marcus smiled at the euphemism. What had spread was the understanding that humanity was willing to use overwhelming force to protect the weak, but preferred to achieve objectives through strategic manipulation and psychological warfare. It was a reputation that served their interests far better than simple military dominance. "One more thing," Chen added, her tone becoming more serious. "Intelligence reports suggest that there are still hegemony loyalist cells operating in several systems. They appear to be planning some kind of coordinated response." "Let them plan," Marcus replied calmly. "Revolution requires hope of success. Desperation only leads to random violence, which serves our purposes perfectly." After the communication ended, Threx stared at Marcus with a mixture of admiration and unease. Commander, do you ever stop thinking 3 moves ahead? Former Warden, Marcus corrected gently. In my experience, the universe is always playing 3 moves ahead. The question is whether you're paying attention. As the twin suns of Caris Prime set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the construction site, Marcus reflected on the path that had brought them to this point. The Reaper had become a legend whispered in the darkest corners of the galaxy, but Marcus Kane had become something far more dangerous, a symbol of the possibility that strength could be used to build rather than destroy. The galaxy would never again underestimate humanity, but more importantly, it would never again assume that the strong were destined to prey upon the weak. The Reaper's greatest victory wasn't in demonstrating human capabilities, but in proving that even the most entrenched systems of oppression could be transformed through the application of superior strategy and unwavering moral conviction. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove that cooperation was stronger than conquest. And somewhere in the depths of space, other civilizations would hear the stories of how one human prisoner had changed the course of galactic history simply by refusing to accept that the way things were was the way things had to be. The legend of the Reaper would live forever, but the work of Marcus Kane was just beginning.